Your lack of faith is disturbing.
You underestimate my power!
Impressive. I am a Jedi.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker.
All right, to Star Wars.
To Star Wars.
That is not bad.
It is not bad.
We are drinking some Anglesea. Anglesea?
We're going with Anglesea.
Anglesea.
I think Anglesea is the proper.
Irish Red Ale from the Tuckahoe Brewing Company here in lovely New Jersey.
It is. And it's got a sailing ship in the background. So you know it's got to be good. Or it's got to be Bilgewater. One or the other.
Yeah, it could be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to All Things Star Wars, the best Star Wars podcast in the galaxy. I'm Mr. Jason Roscom. You might know me from such podcasts as Project VCR and Higher Standards. With me, the Han Solo to my Chewbacca, Dave Martin. Hello, Dave.
Hello. I got nothing. I thought about that for like the past 3 days. Like, how am I going to, what am I going to say?
3 days we've been planning this for like 3 weeks, and you still had nothing, huh?
It's nothing. I'll come up with something better.
Amateur. He's just getting into the podcasting gigs, so you got to give him some time to get acclimated.
That's true. I'm always the guest, never the bride.
Yeah, well,
if that's how that goes. No, it doesn't.
No. All right, I'm gonna have to revoke your Han Solo. So, all right, for anybody who doesn't know, this is a Star Wars only podcast. The title pretty much says it all. We're going to talk about all things Star Wars throughout the course of this show. Obviously, the movies themselves, we're huge fans of the movies. Any Star Wars news that comes out, in fact, we've got a little bit today that we're going to talk about. Stuff from the TV shows, books and comics, to include the new and the old expanded universe. One thing that I really want to do with this show is to keep the spirit of the old expanded universe alive. Video games, obviously, we both play a lot of Star Wars video games, old and new, and any breaking news that's going to come out, like say next week they drop another trailer, like right in the middle of the week before we record, we'll probably do a mini episode.
Which would be awesome.
It would be, but I don't think we're that lucky.
No.
I think what are we in right now? We're in April. We just got the new trailer a couple weeks ago. So I think we are probably not going to see another one until June or July.
Worst ever.
I know. Started off, we're going to talk a little bit about ourselves first. Dave, why don't we start with you? Give us a little bit of your background, specifically as it pertains to Star Wars.
Well, let's see. So I was born in 1975. So one thing Jason and I both have going for us, we're in our 40s.
Yep.
Born in 1975. So I was 2 when A New Hope came out. Obviously, I didn't see that in the theater. Really, my Star Wars experience started with Empire Strikes Back at the drive-in.
Yes.
Went with my uncle to see it in a drive-in, which I wish I could say I remembered a lot about the experience. I don't really. It's one of those things where he had to tell me that was like, hey, remember when I did this? Like, no, what? Jedi, when Jedi came out, I was one of those kids standing out in front of the theater with my, Luke Skywalker all black outfit on and my green lightsaber flashlight. How you doing?
Yep.
And up until that point, my Star Wars embodiment was with the action figures and with the toys and the, X-Wings and Millennium Falcons and, running around the house and starship battles and everything like that. And, it carried through my youth into the video games, and the video games came out in the 90s when the TIE Fighter video game was my just ultimate video game, still is to this day, getting introduced to TIE Fighter Simulator, pictures of my infant son in my lap playing that video game. And
nice. So going back to the early days, the New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, those days, do you remember the first time you actually saw any of the movies? Like, do you have any vivid memories of seeing one of those movies for the first time? Or was it just the kind of thing like with me where it's just you've always known about it? It's always been part of your memory.
It's always been part of my memory. Honestly, it's one of those where it was always like I had the toys, I had the action figures. It was probably on cable because, I was one of those lucky kids that we had cable.
Yeah.
Whether it was pirated at the house or maybe there was a box procured at the Berlin Farmers Market that gave us these magical cable channels.
Yeah, we won't say how you got cable, you just had cable.
I don't know, I was too young to know any better, so but it was always around. And then obviously it was definitely a part of my life when Jedi came out in the theater because it was like I had to be there for when it opened. You know, I had to be one of those people and stand in line and get the whole experience. You know, without the day before the days of I can buy and reserve my seat in the theater online and do all this crap. There was no line. Online was standing in line. That's what she did.
I think as we get closer to the release of Last Jedi, we're just going to have to go into the whole history of movie theaters in general and the movie going experience. But we'll cover that at another time.
Yeah. And then as I got older and like had a job and started a family and everything else, you know, in 97. When I was at Keesler Air Force Base doing initial training, I was down there for when the re-releases came out.
Right, the special editions, the controversial special editions.
4-2 mentioned special editions.
Yes.
But what was really cool about that time was the Micro Machines stuff, Star Wars stuff came out. Like, there wasn't the tiny Micro Machines Star Wars stuff, which I had some of that, but the as I'm gesturing my hands like people can see it, but you know, about size of a beer bottle, TIE Fighter, you know, and the Micro Machines put out all this stuff, and I was a kid down in Keesler Air Force Base with no adult supervision, and there was a toy store in walking distance. Guess what I had?
Yeah.
All of the toys.
And you had a steady paycheck coming in.
I did.
That you didn't have anything else to blow it on. You didn't have to buy your own food.
There was a kid at home that was, you know, needed supporting.
Right. You had a kid at that point.
I did. But that didn't mean I wasn't buying myself some toys and doing that. And it was on my desk and everything else. And yeah, it's just, it's one of those things like the whole nature of this podcast is us talking about like, you know, how fun. We would just sit at work and talk about Star Wars stuff and what's coming up in news and everything else. And I guess, you know, you have a lot of podcast experience. I'm sure you're going to talk about it, but this is so much fun just talking about Star Wars. You know, we've read volumes upon volumes of expanding universe, now Legends materials, and you know, hundreds and hundreds of comic books, and saw the movies hundreds of times, watched as much of Rebels and Clone Wars as we can. You know, I'm sure
we'll get into that in later episodes too.
But it's just one of those things where like getting to sit here and just talk about Star Wars stuff, and you know, hey, here's some stuff we're going to talk about, and just have a very candid conversation about it and what it's going to lead to, and like learning more about Star Wars, like if that's even possible.
Yeah, right.
As much as we can be in it. It's just really exciting. Yeah, it's a part of my life for sure. It's like decorates my life all over the place with Star Wars and
literally.
Yeah, quite frankly, some of it's right here. So yeah, that's Star Wars for me. It's this it's this huge part of my personality, and to be able to have this medium to be able to just kind of sit here and talk about it, you know, once a week at least. Yeah. You know, and in between doing research stuff, I'm so excited. It's going to be so much fun. I can't wait.
Yeah, and this kind of came about. I mentioned before that I do the Project VCR podcast as well, and a lot of this kind of manifested from Dave being a guest on the show every time we would talk about Star Wars movies. And he'd get on, and it would really just be the two of us talking back and forth about Star Wars, and the other co-host, Doug, just kind of off to the side, just interjecting little tidbits here and there. But it was very clear that we were very in sync when it came to the Star Wars conversation, and we would get off on these tangents, and it would just be great. So that whole thing manifested into us, well, why don't we just do our own Star Wars only podcast? Yeah. And I was being interviewed on another podcast called So Your Father's a Nerd. And again, it was just sort of a Q&A session, and we got off on the Star Wars tangent, and I talked about Star Wars for like 35 minutes of that podcast, when that was not the intent at all. So, and I do have to credit Alec from So Your Father's a Nerd podcast for actually giving me the idea about a Star Wars only podcast, and then it kind of rolled from there. As far as me, my story mirrors yours quite a bit. I was born in 1976, so I was less than a year old when the first Star Wars came out, but from my oldest memories, it's always been part of my life. Obviously, Star Wars is ingrained in pop culture and was even back then in the late 70s, early 80s. The first movie I saw in theaters was Return of the Jedi, and it was just, a typical stadium theater. But the funny thing is I may have told you this before, but I saw Return of the Jedi before I saw Empire Strikes Back, because...
Yeah, you did bring that up.
Yeah, because I didn't... Well, my family kind of had cable. We had some, like, ghetto cable. Like, the only channel we had was the movie channel, and they didn't put Empire out on any of the lower tier cable channels. So I never had an opportunity to see Empire because we didn't have a VCR, and obviously didn't see it in theaters when it came out, and never saw it on cable. So I saw Jedi in 83. in theaters. And then it was maybe like a year or two later, we got our first Betamax video cassette player. And the two movies that we rented the day we got that VHS player were Purple Rain and Empire Strikes Back. So, but yeah, I saw that after the fact. So
two ends of a spectrum.
Yes.
Yeah, right there.
And I think that's going to show as we get into our movie ranking list later in this episode. But yeah, as far as the whole Star Wars fandom goes, yeah, I've been a huge fan ever since I was a kid. I had billions of the toys in the early 80s. Had a bit of a dry spell, late 80s, early 90s, because, you know, the Star Wars kind of fell off the map for a while.
Right.
Not completely. Obviously, it was still around, but it's slowly started to kind of die off a little bit until we got this resurgence in the early 90s when there was talk of the prequels. They started putting out new toys. I don't know if you remember that, but in the early to mid 90s, they started putting out all these brand new toy lines. And I started getting into those. And then, like you mentioned, the Micro Machines and then the books. The books was huge when the Heir to the Empire series came out. Because I think that came out 93, 94-ish. Because I remember reading that in high school. And that's when I really started to get back into Star Wars, was when the novels started coming out. Because all throughout high school, I read everything that came out. I read the Heir to the Empire series. I read the Jedi Academy series, everything. And I loved most of them. So, and then we rolled right from that into the prequels. And of course, I did my time at Keesler Air Force Base and engrossed myself in some Star Wars love back then. But yeah, and then now, obviously, that's just everywhere. And, you know, now we both get to share this stuff with our kids, which that's the best thing. And the thing that I'm sure we'll emphasize a lot over the course of the show is the fact that we now get to experience this with our families, not just ourselves and our friends, but also our wives and our children and everything else.
Whether the wives are willing or not, at least for my wife.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that.
Yeah. I did have to drag Kristen to episode 1 3 times. Yeah. Because
you know what? Once is dragging, twice is all right, really. The 3 times you have to be a willing participant when it's 3 times. There has to be some law to that.
This was very early on in our relationship. We'd only been dating for like a year and a half at that point. So I think she still felt obligated to do this, even though she probably didn't want to, because at the time I didn't realize how big of a piece of shit episode 1 was. We'll
get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that.
All right. Moving on away from us. We actually do have some Star Wars news this week. Woohoo! So
hit the drop.
Yes. So.
Oh, wait. No, we don't. Do we have drops?
We need to get that. We need a soundboard with all kinds of.
Insert drop here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought my Dark Lord of the Sith could protect a small thermal exhaust port that's only 2 meters wide. That thing wasn't even fully paid off yet.
Yes. Future Jason, who is editing this show, insert sound effects here.
Or not. Just leave this like that. It's fine.
I'm sure the listeners will love it. So, just this last week, it was announced both the release dates for Indiana Jones 5 and, of course, Star Wars Episode 9. So before we actually get into Star Wars, quick thoughts on Indiana Jones. Even though it's not Star Wars related, it's Lucasfilm, and these two genres have always been kind of tied.
Well, all right. So I'll put it right out there. Like, I haven't seen Indy 4. So I'm... You know, Indiana Jones is they're good movies. 1, 2, and 3 we've seen, you know, we went and saw the thing in Philly this year together for Raiders.
And check out the Project VCR podcast if you want to hear more about that.
Yes, and you will do it.
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't really have a lot of thoughts on this. It's kind of so far in the future where I'm you know, it's interesting because Harrison Ford's going to be involved in it. And obviously, you know, when you bring in an iconic character back into the series, you know, or into the series, it's going to draw a lot of attention.
Sure.
But we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Is it something I'm going to be like, oh, I really need to go into the theater and see it? No, not really. Maybe there'll be a time when it gets closer, because when's it going to, like 2020?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, that's
3
like,
years from now. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't even have time. There's going to be like 2 major Star Wars movies out
at least,
by then.
Yeah.
You know, at least 3, I guess. Really, right?
Depending on the next spinoff, but.
So yeah, there's a lot of Star Wars that I'm probably going to be involved in. You know, I'll hopefully have gotten to level 60 in Battlefront 2 by the time, you know, 2020 rolls around.
I hope so. Jesus. Yeah, the 50s go really slow.
They do. Well, even I'm like, I think I'm at 66 right now. In Battlefront, with logged like several weeks.
Oh God! I'd like if I was able to look at my time played in Battlefront, it would be ridiculous. It would be like divorce level ridiculous.
But you're still married, so obviously you're getting away with it for now.
Yeah, well, no, I tell her I'm studying or I'm doing work or whatnot. Don't listen to this, Kristen.
Yeah, delete that.
Okay, so yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head though when it comes to my thoughts on Indy 5, because you said it's so far in the future and Harrison Ford's going to be in it. He's already like, isn't he like 75 or something? He's fucking old as shit.
Something. He'll probably have landed in the middle of another highway by the time the thing comes out.
I mean, I'm hoping they've planned for his inevitable demise, because he's not getting any younger, and now we're starting to see original cast members starting to drop off.
Yeah.
So it's a sad fact, but it is a fact. So I'm real curious how that's going to go. And it's got to be his last Indiana Jones movie, right?
Man, unless they're going to put him they'll make a remake of Last Crusade, and then they'll have him in a cave acting as the guy protecting the Holy Grail.
Right.
He can be that guy because he'll be that old.
Yeah.
And then do a Pepsi commercial along with it. Yeah. That's a little throwback there.
All right. So
enough Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Moving away from Indy and getting into the Star Wars stuff. So Episode 9 has an official release date. It's going to be May 24th, 2019.
I love the May release.
Of course.
I think part of our discussion has been about, do you think they can hold it? Because it seems that every year, okay, we're going to do, TFA was supposed to be released in May, and they pushed it, right, to December.
Well, I know Last Jedi was for sure. Last year, we were supposed to be, watching Last Jedi in, 2 weeks.
True. Yeah. And then they pushed. But you know what I think? I feel like they're ahead of schedule on Episode 9. With the director and everything else, I think they have a really good idea where the storyline's going. Yeah. Even though Rian Johnson's not Ryan. It's Ryan. Yeah.
which
reading is fundamental.
Well, apparently. His parents decided to spell it Rian for some reason. Why? I don't know.
I don't know. Look, you're talking to somebody who has a daughter named Caitlin, and we thought we were being clever in the spelling because it's we like the name, and here's the spelling. And there's a fucking 1,000 Caitlins in her generation. And I'm sorry, Kate. I wanted you to be named Summer, but anyway, that's not a whole other thing. But the reality is, I think that they'll hold it. I think they'll make if I'm putting money on it, I think they make the May release. I think they're far enough ahead of this, and we're probably going to talk about it later, but we're seeing that they're the timeline isn't so extended where it feels 15 years into the future, now we're filming this part of it. Sure. They're not doing that. I mean, they're going to be in production and everything else.
Right.
A lot sooner. And I feel like they know where the story's going.
Sure. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't already have a rough draft of the script.
Yeah.
We've already got a director. We've already probably got a story. They probably already know, like you said, where the whole story's going. The big thing is think about it. That's May of 19. That's exactly 2 years from now. Exactly 2 years from now, they're going to have to be sitting on a damn near final cut of the movie, getting ready to start printing it and sending it to the theaters.
Maybe they'll even have a trailer out by now. This time 2 years from now.
You would hope.
Jesus. I hate waiting for these trailers.
I mean, to me, the only way that they're going to make that timeline is if they start filming before Last Jedi even releases. They have to start filming it this calendar year, 2017, if they want to get that out by May. Because
that's fair.
Yeah, because with all the effects and everything, it takes a long time.
The effects and you're adding all these worlds. We're seeing the Last Jedi trailer now. They're introducing more worlds, and if you're watching Celebration, we know they're introducing another character and some more development there. Maybe it is a little too complicated to make a May release, but I think Disney's smart enough to know that all right, if we tee up these guys for May and then we push it to December again, do we really want to piss off these nerds again when we know we could have avoided it? I don't think any one of us would have been oh yeah, December of 19. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
We wouldn't even have this conversation.
Right. Well, and it's weird too, because, the May thing was always Star Wars, the original trilogy. And then the prequels, it was always May, middle of May, whenever, what was it? Memorial Day? Is that the one that's in May?
Memorial Day is in May.
Yeah. So it would always be tied in with that Memorial Day weekend and whatnot. And then they got away from that with Force Awakens. And now Star Wars has become, at least for the last 2 movies, a December thing. Right? Between Force Awakens and Rogue One, which I actually liked. I can understand them wanting to do it in the summer because there's probably potential to make more money. But the December release date's been fine. And I would have been more than happy having December be Star Wars month from here on out.
It's now that you've said that, it just popped in my head. You wonder if, because they own the Marvel property as well, we're getting a lot of these Marvel releases for summer.
Yes.
You wonder if they know that, hey, we know that in May of 19, we're not pushing out a Marvel release, so this is going to be our big summer movie. Mm-hmm. You wonder if they're looking at the timeline, and that's their intent. It's hey, if we're not pushing out a Captain America 5, the Everything Goes to Hell movie, not busting on that. I'm not a huge Marvel guy like that.
Really? All right.
They're good movies. That's for another conversation.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, maybe Disney's just looking at it. Let's face it, it's about the money, right?
Oh, of course.
Insert money drop here.
Yeah.
But it's maybe that's a good part of it too. Like, hey, we're looking at what's the summer of 19 going to look like? Are we pushing anything out?
Mm-hmm.
If we have Star Wars as our big push for the summer, that'll be our moneymaker there.
Yeah,
and then we have the video releases for Christmas.
Yeah.
And then they'll double bang for that. Hey, they get the movie out that year, and then by the way, here's the Blu-ray release just in time for Christmas.
Yeah, no, financially it makes perfect sense. And Disney has to recoup that $4 billion they spent on Lucasfilm, which they probably already made
they
that
already
back.
did that.
Yeah, they made that back with Force Awakens, I'm sure. Oh God, that.
We just have to bow to the genius of, hey, here's a property that's going to make fistfuls of dollars, and they're going to do it every which way.
They did it right, though. They did it absolutely right. That's one thing. And, we may have to spend a whole episode just talking about the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm and the Star Wars franchise. So, we'll table that discussion for now.
Write that down for later.
Yeah. Just real quick, we have a little bit of time. We were talking about release dates. Han Solo, the Han Solo movie, is still scheduled for a May release date, May of 18.
So a year from now.
Yeah, exactly a year from now. As far as I know, they're still filming it. Like, principal photography has not finished on that movie. So do you think that's still feasible? Because it's been my theory from the beginning that Han Solo is going to get pushed back to December of 18. So we're going to have 4 December Star Wars movies in a row.
It's entirely possible. I really feel like there's almost no news, nothing for us to really grab hold of officially.
Yeah,
I'm going to take this opportunity right now to I think we feel the same way about this, but social media is great, and this is how we're hopefully everyone gets a chance to hear about this podcast through social media and everything else.
Sure.
However, I do not go down the rabbit holes of all the different things here's something that's going on set of this one, and here's a little teaser what's going on with this character. I ignore all that stuff. If I'm on Facebook and there's I like every Star Wars page that's out there. However, I will not fall for that clickbait and go and what's this person's theory about that or anything else. My Star Wars theories are kind of mine.
Yeah.
And I'm put this more towards how Dave thinks about Star Wars. Mm-hmm. But, if I hadn't read it in a book or some sort of canon, or I get some sort of lead on it or something that we're talking about, I'm not going to go into those. Here's what the Nerdist thinks about this particular thing.
Sure.
Although the Nerdist, I think, is probably one of the better ones, because I don't think they're trying to make it as much about their, they're not to have this real huge swing of an opinion.
Right.
They're going to stay pretty much in line with what everyone else is thinking. But there's a couple things I read even recently, even with the Star Wars stuff or Star Wars. Yeah, everything Star Wars. The Han Solo one, where it's they're starting, there's a tangent out there that people are talking about. I'm not looking at I don't want to look at any of that.
Right.
I want to see what, the director's posting on Instagram. I think on Instagram, yesterday or today, there was, the cast was in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon.
Right.
Woody Harrelson and everything else. And let's draw our conclusions from something like that, or an article from Entertainment Weekly, that the cast and the director is kind of pushing this stuff out.
Right. It was vetted through Disney and all that.
Exactly. I know me personally, I'm really going to try and avoid like I said, the clickbait and the rabbit holes for a lot of that Star Wars stuff.
And I will say this. That's one thing that I do want to avoid on this show is getting into... You and I can speculate. We can have our own speculation. Sure. I don't want to get into other people's speculation, and I don't want to get into spoilers for any of the upcoming movies.
Agreed.
That's the big thing, because I already told you this story, but for the listeners, I had the ending for Force Awakens completely spoiled for me in September of that year. Because I was on fucking Ain't It Cool News, the movie news website, and there were a bunch of people speculating, well, where's Luke in all these trailers? Luke's not here. He's not on the poster. And then one guy in a fucking paragraph in the comments goes, the reason Luke's not in this is because he only appears for the last 1 minute of the movie when Rey returns his original lightsaber to him on this island, blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting there reading that. I'm like, God, that's awfully specific for a fan theory. And then as you and I are sitting in the theaters on opening night watching it, and it's getting closer and closer to that ending, I'm like, motherfucker. And sure enough, she shows up on the island, and as she's walking up those steps and everything that first time in the movie, as you're watching it for the first time, I'm sitting there just stewing. I'm just like, motherfucking, I'm going to find that person and I'm going to stab him with a pencil in the eyeball.
I'll give you a lot of credit because or maybe it's my engrossment into the scene itself, so I wasn't really looking at your reaction. But yeah, if you didn't give off the vibe that like I know what's going to happen here, like, so thanks for not ruining it for everyone else.
Right? Yeah. No, I was so mad about that, and I don't ever want.
Blame you.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want that to happen to anybody. Even though, honestly, Rey just walking up to him on the island at the end really wasn't that huge of a twist or anything. I still had it spoiled for me, and I was fucking pissed.
Yeah.
So
I agree with you. I think that for our discussions and everything else and the stuff that we talk about, we're coming at it from a place of this is where our subject matter expertise is going to lean a lot towards what we've seen, what we've read, which is a lot, and a lot of expanded universe speculation.
Yes.
Because I think there's still some parallels to draw. You know, I think Walt Disney is made legends or expanded universe. However, I think they're starting to peel through some of that, and we're definitely going to talk about those connections and we're talking about things like Thrawn and those things. So.
Yeah, and that's a clear sign, too, this new Thrawn, that they don't want to completely just let the old expanded universe die.
Yeah, there's great stuff there.
Yeah.
Great stories, great characters. You know, it's a shame that they didn't start that way, but we're in a good place, you know, where there's some of those storylines I think are going to creep through, and I think it's going to be great.
Yeah. So you ready to do our main topic of the day?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So for all you listeners to kind of get a better idea for where Dave and I are coming from and our Star Wars fandom, we have both decided to do our preference order for the 9 theatrically released movies. Now, you may be saying to yourself, I only remember, 7 episodes and Rogue One being released. Well, there was a small little release in 2008, I guess we determined.
Yes,
even though I
2008.
Could have swore it was earlier than that.
Thank you, internets.
Yeah, you can listen to our prequel episode if you want to hear all about that. But yeah, the Clone Wars, the animated TV show, had a movie that kickstarted the whole show that was released in theaters. Very limited time. I think it was a fairly limited release overall, but it was released in theaters, made $60 million. And
yeah, something like that. And
we felt we should at least include it in this list because it was a movie with Star Wars in the title that was released theatrically. So that is part of our list. So you know how we're going to do this, right? We'll do my 9, your 9, your 8, my 8, and so forth and so forth.
What could possibly go wrong?
Oh, nothing. That's the best laid plans. So I will start.
Okay.
So my number 9 movie. Now, keep in mind, too, this is just our personal preference, and this is not like what we think is actually a good movie per se. It's more of our favorites, I guess, like our favorites.
This is our personal order, like which movies we like the best. This has nothing to do with viewing order or anything else.
Right.
That's a whole nother topic of conversation.
Yeah.
This is just when you sit down and you really want to like, what movie do I like best in some sort of order?
Yes.
You have to do it. This is what this is.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, well, this one had the best cinematography and the best script.
Yeah,
and
God, if I was that smart, then I probably would be doing something other than this.
All right, so my number 9 is The Clone Wars.
Oh, what a shock!
I watched it, and God, it was the dog shits. It was. I mean, the dialogue was painful to listen to. It was like a continuation of episode 1 and 2, essentially. It was. I thank God that they actually got their shit together throughout the course of the actual Clone Wars TV show because it had longevity. It lasted for 6 or 7 seasons, right?
Yeah, I want to say it was 6. I don't know. We'll have to Google that. But
and I guess that's the one redeeming quality of the Clone Wars is that it was the catalyst of the TV show. But this movie, I don't think I've ever sat through it from start to finish. I know I started it once. I'm just like, oh, this is god awful. I don't want to watch this anymore. And clearly it was made for kids. It was made for a younger audience.
Right. So
it wasn't made for adults like us, which I can understand that to a point.
It was made for kids, but I think that not kids so much as maybe like that teenage. Like I think they were trying to make it a little bit more gritty.
Yeah.
Like the darkness of it. Like it did have like as a tone. Like, again, we're not talking about cinematography here. I'm just talking about like general tone of like how it was, like the setting.
Yeah.
I think they were trying to go a little bit more gritty and make it like not so. It wasn't like the Lego. When you had Lego. The Disney releases for the Lego guys when they came out and they had their little adventures, which I think they were really good. That was definitely geared towards like. Below PG.
But see, that had humor that adults could appreciate.
Absolutely.
Though. And that's what I think this movie really lacked was
there was no humor element.
Yeah,
really.
and there was nothing to like hook adults, I felt like, besides the fact that it was Star Wars. You know,
Right.
it's like, oh, it's Star Wars. They'll pay their money and,
Right.
go about their day. But yeah, it did not do anything for me, honestly. And I should probably try to sit and watch it start to finish again, but
we should probably just do it. I mean, how long is it? Probably less than
like
2 hours.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's like an hour and 10, hour 20.
I mean, like I said, I own the DVD, so
Yeah.
excuse me. Maybe we sit down and try and stomach our way through it.
Over several more beers, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. We'd record the commentary.
Yeah.
Like MST 3000 it.
Yep. So moving on to your number 9.
All right, so my number 9, as we sit here and trash the Clone Wars, maybe that's higher on my list. I don't know.
I'm curious, and we have not shown each other our lists,
Nope.
by the way.
Nope,
so
this is-
I have no idea what Dave's
He
number.
is protecting his steno notebook
Yes.
with great vigor. No, my number 9 is the Clone Wars as well.
Okay.
Like it's funny because we had a conversation. I didn't know it was a theatrical release, which is really, to me, it's surprising. And I think I mentioned it when we talked about it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising to me that I didn't like, hey, it's Star Wars in the theater. Let me go out and see this just because it's a product.
Right.
I didn't. For whatever reason, I didn't. Like, it was one of those things where I picked up in a DVD and I watched it on DVD.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, I wasn't turned off by it, but I was kind of, all right, I think they were expanded universe was still a thing. And I half expected some expanded universe kind of theories and things like that, like the way they were trying to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of let's open this Clone Wars thing up to ultimately what they did in the series. Is they open up and made it part of this bigger universe,
Yes.
allowed so many other characters and other things to kind of come into it. Whereas with the movie, I think they really tried to stay streamlined and like, here's this animation that we're doing. And I mean, let's face it, I think Lucas even talked about it. This is kind of how he does his things. Like, I've got this new toy that I really want to get out there and want people to see, because the Clone Wars series started in 2008 as well.
Yeah.
So this was kind of the kickoff to like, hey, here's this animation style. Let's see how it does.
Yeah.
They used us as lemmings in the movie theater to do it. And then I think that's also why, like, Clone Wars initially, the series, the television series, didn't really take off right away. So
No, I don't think it did.
and it probably is because of a little bit of a clunker that this movie was.
Yeah, and from what I recall, the first couple episodes were along the same tone. They weren't that great. And you mentioned the animation. I didn't really warm to the animation for a long time because it seemed weird. I don't know what it was, but yeah, something about that animation style did not grasp me, especially after we had just gotten through with that other animated Clone Wars, that like 8-episode series that came out. Remember the one I'm talking about, in that completely different animation style? Fuck. All right.
I don't remember.
At the risk of sounding like complete jackasses, we may cut this whole part out.
No, but you know what? That's write that down, because that's one more thing we can get into, like when we're talking about like kind of development of that.
Yeah.
I think the PS2 Battlefront 2 game, when I was out, is that about the same time that all that stuff was coming out? Where you had the Clone Wars? Was that a little bit sooner?
Well,
Can we make correlations there?
Yeah, well, I think it took place during the Clone Wars.
Right, but I mean, did the video game release at the same time?
May have released a little bit afterwards.
Maybe. I'm trying to think, because my son was really into that game, and he's 20 now, so it's kind of like my time span for thinking of things like that is like, oh, that was only a few years ago. No, it was probably like a decade and a half ago.
It was just your son that was really into that game?
Well, my son had time to play it, and I didn't have as much time to play it.
Right.
Yeah, so that was my number 9.
Okay, so you're number 8.
My number 8 is Episode 1, Phantom Menace. I would imagine yours are going to probably be along a similar lines. Mm-hmm. So the way I broke my stuff down is I kind of went likes and dislikes, just for ease of trying to, because I could probably talk about one of these movies for 15 minutes alone.
Right, and we're trying to like get through this list within an hour, so.
But so my likes about Episode 1, it was Darth Maul. I like the introduction of the character. I like the.
Did you also like the exit of the character?
You know what, the fight scene and all that stuff. It was one of those things where this character should have had a lot more to do in the story. Mm-hmm. I felt like, even when I watched it for the first time, I felt like this was something that probably had more to do in the story, but like, because they wanted to get all this other stuff in, like, hey, we need more Jar Jar Binks, so we're gonna have to cut some of this Darth Maul. So I think that's. They felt like they had enough of that character in there. But think about when Episode 1 came out, like, this was, kicking off a whole new era of Star Wars, and, these things that were happening, and everyone was all hyped up to see it. and okay, here's these characters, and we're going to kill off what could potentially be great characters like Qui-Gon.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I don't sense anything. Credits will do fine.
No, they won't.
Credits will do fine.
No, they won't.
We're going to kill him off. We're going to kill off Darth Maul and then fucking focus on this kid. Anyway, if we're talking about the likes, I really like the Darth Maul character. I like the idea that, okay, there was another Force-sensitive individual that was Sith, air quote. We can talk about that in depth in another time, but, here's this Hand of the Emperor that was going out and doing these things before the Emperor character was even really developed.
Sure.
So I did like that. And I like the fight scene. I mean, that 5 minutes of the movie, or however long it was probably the best part of the whole thing. You could trash everything else.
Yeah. I think most fans pretty much agreed.
And that was my dislike. It's like almost everything else.
Yeah.
It was there. I mean, there was definitely parts to it. It was still Star Wars. And again, I've said it on your podcast, and other podcasts I've been on with you. I'm a prequels apologist.
Yes.
Like, the prequels have a place in the Star Wars universe. Blah. That being said, I appreciated episode 1 more when I saw the episode 1 documentary.
Oh, yeah.
Go on YouTube and watch the episode 1 documentary out there. If everybody that's out there is reverberating with hate about episode 1 and Jar Jar Binks and everything else. If you watch the episode 1 documentary and think of it from his aspect of like, this is what George wanted to do, like, this is what the technology, this is what he had intended for the characters. It's just that the final product, the final edit it was too much.
Right. Well, yeah, and I will say, I think it's called From the Beginning is the name of that documentary.
I think so.
It's better than episode 1. If you haven't seen it.
I agree, and it's probably about as long too.
Oh yeah. It's the length of a movie, and if you haven't seen it and you're a Star Wars fan, for God's sakes, go watch it. It's amazing. It's on every copy of the DVD and Blu-ray that's out there. It's like you said, probably on YouTube too.
There's a good copy of it on YouTube. I've watched it several times.
Yeah, and George Lucas's intent aside, it doesn't really cover up for the fact that he can't write dialogue for shit or direct actors.
The final product just didn't cut it. I mean, it made number 8.
Yep. And speaking of number 8s, my number 8 is episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Shocking.
Yeah, I know, right? I as far as my notes go, I basically wrote god awful with very few exceptions. Even my kids don't like it. And
it was written for them,
right? And that was the thing. That's George Lucas's big excuse is, well, I made it for kids. It's a movie for kids. Well,
he said that shit in Celebration the other day too. Like,
he did.
He reiterated it as like, I wrote this for 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
Well, even 12-year-olds didn't like that.
Yeah.
So fuck off.
Yeah, I mean, if anything came out of it beyond what you said, it's that we shouldn't set our hopes so high for a Star Wars movie. And, it got us to not...
And yet we do every time.
We do, but I think to an extent it kind of helped Force Awakens, because a lot of people, maybe not people like us, like the super fanboys, but your casual viewer didn't have their expectations set so high because they still remembered the prequels and how they were kind of...
I know it provided for a lot of discussion points, for sure.
Yeah.
Not every... Star Wars product was gold at that point because of the prequels. So people, I don't think it had as far to fall, maybe because of the prequels. So I'll agree with you there.
All right. So that's enough Phantom Menace for now. I'm sure we'll spend a whole episode just talking about it. Probably won't be good. My number 7. This is where our lists are probably going to start to diverge a little bit, because my number 7 is episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
Okay.
I felt like it was a big letdown, right? With episode 2, we saw some improvement on episode 1, still had some issues, but I felt like they were starting to get on the right track. And I had higher hopes for episode 3. Like, I thought, okay, Lucas has finally got his shit together. He's going to conclude this trilogy in a good way. And I felt like it was just a fucking mess. It was a mess and a train wreck of a conclusion, where it felt like shit was just kind of like thrown to the wall to see what would stick. And it just, again, the way they wrapped it up, it was just so clunky. It wasn't the worst movie. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I would probably rarely ever watch episode 1 intentionally ever again, but I would watch Revenge of the Sith again. It had more redeeming parts than episode 1. It did have some good parts. I think it just had still several negatives. It took the Emperor character and I don't know, it took him in a direction I was not wanting to see him, like when he just became kind of goofy and like cackly and just like all strange at the end when he should have been a lot darker and just
it's almost like they like, okay, this, we can't let him go too far off the deep end. So it is going to, I don't know, softens the right word because obviously it's still evil, but
and I feel like Anakin's turn to the dark side was so rushed, as was pretty much closing everybody's storylines at the end. So it just it was a disappointment. It was just a big disappointment, more than episode 1, honestly.
So my number 7, just in the interest of time, is also episode 3.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and what I like about it was the continuity of the timeline.
Right.
You know, really when it comes down to it is like episode 1, 2, and 3 had a job to do as prequels, right?
Yeah.
So there was as we marched towards what episode 4 was supposed to be, like we had some logical placeholders, right? We see for all the things about the prequels that had to do with the Senate and all the things that made it so slow in episode 1, where we're talking about the Trade Federation bullshit and embargoes and all that other nonsense. It had some logical progression where, you know, how did the Senate, like, how did in episode 4 did we get to a point where the Emperor just disbands the Senate?
Yeah.
You know, you can, like, okay, well, for one, the Emperor threw the fucking Senate at Yoda. You know,
I threw the Senate at him.
That's right. So he kind of broke that up. So I think there was some redeeming parts to episode 3. I agree with you. There was a bit of a letdown.
Yeah.
To try and describe it, at the end of the movie, my biggest takeaway from that was that this is all about a broad. Like the whole, like I'm sitting there in the theater watching episode 3 and it just kind of hit me in a wave. Like it's all about a woman.
Yeah.
Like the entire, all 6 movies all end up folding around like this dude falling in love with a woman that he couldn't have.
Right.
You know, and it's a goddamn love story. And I was pissed off about that shit for like a week. You know, I was like, I had to watch the other movies to wash it out of myself. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
Like now we're going to turn this into a goddamn, why don't you have a rom-com for the next one? You know, it just pissed me off.
That could happen in a spinoff. We could have a romantic comedy.
Yeah,
Star
and I'll
Wars
watch
movie.
it once and then I'll never watch it again. Yeah. Episode 3, the big likes were the timeline, the continuity. You see the push away from Obi-Wan and Anakin as well.
Yeah.
Like you see, like on Mustafar, like it rushed all the way to get to that point.
It did, and that was my big problem.
But once you get to that point, like with high ground illusions aside, you know, where he's burned the shit out of him. Okay, now we know how Darth Vader became Darth Vader. You know, he got his fucking arms and legs burned off, and he has to go through this process to become Darth Vader. And you know, so I'll give it credit for that. There was some good plot points in the storyline, but that's about it. As a movie, it disappointed. Yeah. At the end of the day, still very watchable though. I'll definitely watch it.
Okay.
If you want to hear about Amidala looking like she got stung in the face by bees, listen to the prequel.
Yeah, listen to our prequel episode. All right, so your number 6.
My number 6 is episode 2. So for me, for the likes for episode 2, I've written down epic open area war scenes. So I sat in a theater. I think it was actually TDY. You know, with another guy. We're out at some school or whatever. Went, saw it in the theater like the first weekend it came out. And I was impressed by what they were doing with the CGI. Like in episode 1, we saw CGI characters all over the place and like kind of how the Gungans and all that stuff like kind of interacted with there was like this level of interaction there with like the CGI. It's just like, okay, I see what you're doing here.
Yeah, and the Trade Federation droids and all that shit.
Then when you get to the Clone Wars, now we're going to see like Clone Wars? What?
Yeah.
Squeaky? What? Can we edit that?
No, that's staying in.
You know, we see these just big open field battle scenes with the Jedi, or you see the Jedi as those generals, as like those battlefield generals, and how the clones are introduced, like how that stuff happens. I thought that was good. I liked how they did that.
Yeah.
I liked how, like, where does this clone army come from? Like, who's this Dooku character? Like, how is this intertwined? How's this part of the story intertwined? We get a better grasp of who Obi-Wan Kenobi is. It's kind of a jump to where he's like goes from Padawan to this guy, and there is some awkward scenes between him and Hayden Christensen that, like, I think that's where it kind of knocks it down a few pegs,
right?
You know, episodically for me. But I like where Obi-Wan, like, where you could tell he was a lot stronger and a lot better Jedi than he was being allowed to be.
Right, and it was a 10-year gap between episode 1 and 2, so he had time to mature and become a totally different person.
But they went too far to the point where, like, we need to make this guy look like Obi-Wan from 1977.
Right.
So now let's give him some mannerisms, like, kind of force some mannerisms on him to make him get to that point where you had. I think some of it was very organic and some of it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Ewan McGregor did a fantastic job of channeling Alec Guinness.
Agreed.
And channeling that version of Obi-Wan. Like, he did a really good job.
But like you said it earlier, like the screenplay, the writing itself, I don't think fit some of those. Like, I understand what they're trying to do in some of the scenes, and they're trying to lay things out a little bit for people, but there's a lot of us that didn't need that extrapolation. Like, we don't need that.
Right.
Like, okay, I see what you're doing here.
And honestly, this story probably could have been told over 5 or 6 movies. And it probably should have. Like, to get the full effect, it probably should have been stretched out a little more.
Just for the introduction of the clones and what the Clone Wars were, that should have been its own 3.
Right.
Its own trilogy.
Yeah, and Anakin's journey to the dark side, as opposed to, hacking up the Sand People because they killed his mom, and then being scared that Padme was going to die and turning to the dark side.
Which, that scene in particular, that's one of those where we can probably extract that scene and say that was probably better for the character development of Darth Vader than it was for the movie. Like, if you took that in and of itself and said this happened, like, say we read that in a book, I bet you'd take that a lot more seriously than it was portrayed in the movie.
Right, and we're talking the Sand People scene?
The Sand People, when he goes in and basically avenges his mother.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that he was so... I even, again, being a prequels apologist, the fact that he was so tortured by leaving his mother alone and knowing something was happening and having those dreams and stuff like that, I'll give that to them as this is a good character point. This is a good development for this particular character. Why would this individual be so weak as to turn to the dark side? Like, he has all this internal conflict, and we can talk at length about, like, what the Jedi Council's doing and everything else. But,
yeah, I think we better continue on because we're running a little long here. But
damn it!
And I thought that our lists were going to be a lot different, but so far we're all spot on. My number 6 is Episode 2, Attack of the Clones.
Right.
Just some of my quick notes, because we've talked this one to death already. Was Obi-Wan? I thought he shined in the movie. I really like Jango Fett in the movie. I thought he was a good character. The whole introduction of the clones, and we touched on this just a little bit in our prequel episode. But Natalie Portman looked so good in this movie.
But she got her clothes ripped off by that tiger lion thing, whatever. Like, yes. That was, by the coloring book.
Yeah, a couple of men still in their prime. That was a nice visual. The worst part about that movie was just the chemistry or lack thereof between Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen and their dialogue. It was their dialogue, the directing, and the just complete lack of chemistry of this forced relationship just made so much of that fall flat, where this could have been a phenomenal movie. And I really enjoy a lot of aspects of Attack of the Clones, kind of like you. It's just unfortunate that we got just such dry dialogue and such wooden acting.
We can talk a lot about, like, the forced love story. And again, 16 different outfit changes. Let's put on some tight black thing for parading around in front of this poor kid who's just full of raging hormones. Like, oh, this isn't about relationship. Whatever. Again, that's a whole nother episode.
So now we get into the nitty gritty, as I like to call it. This is where the list got a little bit hard for the next 2 or 3 movies for me.
All right.
So, and I know I'm going to get some heat for these next couple of entries. So I'm ready for it. But my number 5 right now, this was hard. This movie was almost number 4, but number 5, Rogue One.
Okay.
It's still so new. I think it still needs time to sink in, but fantastic movie. Very well done. Great story, great standalone movie that fits perfectly into our Star Wars universe. I don't know if I've had enough time for it to sink in. And just to remind people, we did a full review of this in the Project VCR podcast. Yep. So if you want to hear mine and Dave's full thoughts on Rogue One, go listen to Project VCR. But yeah, it's great movie. It was a great way to start the spin-off series. I don't know if I could rank it any higher right now, but over time, it very well could raise in the rankings. Once I have more time to watch it and let it sink in.
It's interesting because you're talking about your number 5 and number 4. Mm-hmm. Being tight. It is. It's close.
Yeah.
For me, my number 5 is Return of the Jedi. Really. And here's why. So let's talk about what I didn't like. What I didn't like as I put in my notes, 40-year-old Dave, Endor makes the movie tough for me to watch.
So is it because of the cutesy Ewoks, the Muppets?
It's not just the Ewoks. It's kind of the it was just a level of suspension of disbelief that I wasn't having on Endor. If I look at it as like, okay, the Emperor's like planning all these things, this is why this all happens, but they're showing up with a few dozen people to go do this thing, and it's just like there's a point of it where I was just like, I don't think Luke should have ever been there with them. Like there's a point in the story where I think they wanted to go in a certain direction. I think ultimately they wanted the Leia and Han character to have that moment when she, pulls, like she's wounded and she's laying there and she shoots the stormtroopers, an iconic, like she returns the I love you and I know thing. I think they basically did that entire thing just to get them there. I really, watching it recently, the Endor thing really put me off. The other stuff, the other concepts of that, like everything that's happening in a Death Star, it's still, even me to this day, like if I could have my suspension of disbelief be better about the Ewoks are definitely a part of it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, but I think that there's too much left to chance, and we have to assume too much to make that believable. Everything that happened in Endor. I think that you could have made even allusions to other things that were going on a planet that would have made that little team of people believable, but it really wasn't. So, and they do it better in the books. Like I've read certain books, even as canon, that have done it. It's almost like they realize that, okay, if we just believe it, it's this little small group, this little group of soldiers that are going in and performing this task, like we need some diversionary tactic. We need something else going on. And maybe it's 20 years of military service. Maybe that's entered into it at this point in my life. But so that's why it's 5.
Okay.
The likes, I mean, I even put it in here. 8-year-old Dave loved everything about this movie. Yeah. There was nothing better. Yeah. Nothing better on earth than The Return of the Jedi. And, at that age, like it epitomized everything. It brought Slave Leia into the spank bag.
Yes.
It had all, it did all these things for preteen, kid, especially when it came out on VHS and everything else. Like watch it over and over and over again. Jabba the Hutt and like those things, and like, but it's definitely like, again, looking at it, you're asking me to rate it as it is right now, and it's an important movie in my life for sure. Yeah. But when I'm ranking these movies, it's definitely number 5.
That's pretty surprising. Right, that's surprising, and I'll get into my thoughts when it shows up on my list. Right. But moving on. So
my number 4 was Rogue One.
Okay.
All right. So we're talking about like the interchangeability of like 5 and 4. I kind of agree with you that there's a newness to Rogue One.
Yeah.
But it's new, but it's old. You know what I mean? Like they deliberately made it circa 1977. Like,
yeah.
Like I said, listen to the Project VCR review that we did for it to, really, get my notes on that. But I think that it has its place in this universe for sure. It'd be like just reading a book. Like if this came out in a book and I had read it, it'd probably be the same thing for me. Like, wow, they did that really well. These are where these characters are. They introduced new characters, and then they didn't let these new characters bleed into something we already know.
Yeah.
They had a beginning and an end, and it fit perfectly into the timeline.
Yeah.
So they did a great job in that. But my personal preference is there's 3 other movies ahead of this one that are going to make my, be in the tops.
Yep.
It is a good movie. Part of the best franchise ever of movies made. But it's a little bit better than Jedi, I think, because they did such a good job of incorporating into my world, into my Star Wars universe, and that's why it sneaks ahead of Return of the Jedi, because there's not very much to dislike.
No, not really. Again, we go into it in the Project VCR
absolutely.
review, but what few dislikes I had about it were not nearly enough to drop it in the list. So my number 4, this is where the real heat's going to come.
All right.
I'm expecting all kinds of "fuck you're a piece of shit" on Twitter and everything else. My number 4, Empire Strikes Back.
Wow, yeah, you will get a lot of hate.
Yeah,
for that.
It was never my favorite movie in the series. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this show, it was the last one I saw of the original trilogy. I saw it out of order, so that may have had something to do with it. But it never caught me the way it does for a lot of other Star Wars fans.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Did you have one of the Tauntaums?
I did.
You did have one of those?
The toy with the belly you can stick a character into? Yeah.
And you still all right.
Yeah,
I'm trying to figure out the reason.
Now let's make no mistake, I still love this movie. I still think it's a fantastic movie, and I understand why the hardcore fans love this more than all the other movies. For me personally, it's just okay when ranked with the rest of the movies on my list. When I'd seen it, I already knew Vader was Luke's father. I never had that oh shit moment where I'm watching and I'm like, oh my god, Vader's Luke's father. I already knew.
Right.
That had already been spoiled for me as a kid. You take that out of the equation, and what does this movie really do? It's just, a couple of beats, beat to beat to beat, these characters going from one place to another, having these adventures, which is still all fine and good.
I like how you're building your case for everyone to hate you for this. Listen to him downplay the movie, people.
It's just,
get on Instagram right now.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, it didn't do as much for me as the other three movies in my list.
Look, you know what? It's perfectly respectable, and I think there's a conversation to be had about when The Last Jedi comes out, because there are some parallels being drawn. It's like, hey, is this going to be paced the same way as Empire?
Yeah.
I think Empire had a lot to build on. Like, Empire went from the movie preceding that had a beginning and an end.
Yes.
It could have been completely on its own. So I think maybe they probably spent time in Empire, like, kind of reintroducing characters because they had the end.
Right. And they knew they were able to work off a cliffhanger at this point.
So, and I don't think they're going to have that with Last Jedi, so I don't want to anticipate that, but it does make for an interesting conversation.
Yeah. And just one other note on Empire Strikes Back, the Han Solo torture scene, where they fucking strapped him to that board and then they put him against that like whole shock thing.
Right.
That scene fucking traumatized me for a long time. A very long time.
Were you in survival school? Like, were you thinking about that when we were in positions of torture? Or, like, did you go back to that?
But I mean, it's like just the whole concept of that scene is fucking horrifying. And I give credit to Harrison Ford because he played it really well, because they have that scene where they're lowering them into this little shock torture machine, right? But then they pan to the scene where it's Vader and Boba Fett walking and having their conversation, but you can still hear him like fucking screaming in agony in the background. Yep. And that's what really fucking hit me, where it's like, it's all this shit that's going on off screen, but you can only imagine what the fuck's going on. And
that's one of the best lines in Star Wars comes after that, though, is like when he gets
I feel terrible.
I feel terrible.
Right. Yeah.
I use that all the time.
Oh yeah. After thinking about that scene, like, Han Solo is just the most tragic character in this whole saga. Like, you think about it. You think of all the bullshit he went through. Started off not believing in the Force, having to go through all this bullshit, getting frozen carbonite, tortured, all this stuff. Eventually, hooks up with Leia, but only to be killed by his own son, who followed the Force, which was the thing that he initially said that he didn't believe in, that he begrudgingly accepted as fact by Force Awakens.
That sounds like a good episode that we need to do, the tragedy of Han Solo.
Yeah. So, all right, are we up to my number 3? Because we did your 4 already, right?
We did.
All right, and then we did my 4. So, all right, so we're doing my 3, and that is Episode 7, Force Awakens.
That's your number 3?
It's my number 3.
Wow, okay.
What's not to love? It's a great movie. It was a great way to restart the series, introduced us to a bunch of cool new characters. The big downer of this whole movie is the fact that it is just the first of a trilogy, and they know that going into it. So there's a lot of mystery still in this new trilogy. There's a lot of, what's going on, who's this person, who's that person. But it was just a really good, fun movie. I absolutely loved it. I still watch it probably at least once every couple of weeks. I just had it on a few days ago as I was cleaning up this room. Mm-hmm. Great movie, great soundtrack. Glad they brought back the original cast. I mean, what's not to love?
But not a love enough to make it make the top 2. Interesting. All right, well, my number 3 is Empire.
Okay.
All right. And so, again, same type of argument. Like, the purists out there will be like, Empire is the best movie, man. What? I mean, in reality, there's a lot of things about Empire that we've already stated.
Yeah.
Like, it is a transition movie. Mm-hmm. It is the darker of the movies. Mm-hmm. And some people like that. I like the fact that, in Empire, it went from like, okay, the Empire was obviously defeated, and yet they still prevail. Like, it makes sense. Oh yeah. You destroyed their Death Star, but oh wait, there's more. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
I kind of like that transition. I liked everything in Hoth. Like, there was just enough, like, to start the movie with some intrigue, and some, you have 3PO actually said some funny shit.
Oh yeah, he had some really good points in that movie.
Like, Empire is probably 3PO's best movie. Really.
Can I get off on a little tangent since we're talking about that? Okay, so like me, I'm sure you saw the movie probably for the most part, in a standard definition TV, not widescreen, right? For years and years. Okay.
yeah.
So for years and years.
What is this widescreen you speak of? Like that shit didn't come out till what? Like
the late 90s.
I didn't have a widescreen anything in my house until I was like like 2008.
You see that THX widescreen edition Star Wars trilogy? I bought that in 95 or 96.
And you had a TV you could watch it on?
You didn't have to. It just put the black bars on the top and bottom, so you saw the full.
Maybe I needed
picture.
glasses earlier when I was younger.
Anyway, so for the most part, most of us plebs would watch Star Wars in a standard definition on a standard definition TV, no widescreen, pan and scan as they call it. For years and years, I watched it like that. Then I finally bought this widescreen edition, and the scene where Leia kisses Luke, you see it now because everything's in widescreen.
Right.
But in the standard definition, all you saw was her kissing Luke, and then you could kind of see over their shoulder Han just looking over, going like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, you don't.
What you don't see is C-3PO walking up and then like looking at Han like, "Dude." That you don't see that in the standard definition. So when I got the widescreen edition and I'm watching that, I burst out fucking laughing. I'm like, oh my God, that is the greatest in the world. And I've been missing this for years, for over a decade. I've been missing out on this one subtle little movement by C-3PO because of fucking pan and scan TVs.
You know what? Now that you say that, I probably didn't see that part of it till I saw it in the re-release in 97.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when I probably saw that particular part of that scene.
But yeah, it's so subtle, but it's great. It's just C-3PO, like as soon as she starts kissing him, she walks up right next to Han, and then he just kind of looks up at him like, dude.
And there's one of the outtakes, and you see it all the time. There's memes about it where it's like 3PO like messing around with the stormtroopers, like the snowtroopers, and he put like they had like a Wampa locked up somewhere in there, and he like peels the sign off of it and like runs away. And the stormtroopers go busting in there, and one of them gets grabbed by a Wampa, like the big furry arm. Pulls him in. I just like there's stuff like that that's good about it. This is where I also make mention in Empire, where Lucas writes, into the story, and maybe it was Kirshner, more involved in it, but like this is where the Han and Leia love story has like this is how you should have written it with Anakin and Padme.
Yeah.
You already wrote this successful, like kind of builds into each other, like the scoundrel, and she's really resisting. He's got the bad boy thing going on. He's got the dice banging off the Millennium Falcon, all that bullshit.
Oh,
right?
sure.
So like they're playing that up in this movie, and that was probably that was the way to do it. And if they had done that in episode 2, like I think we'd be talking about a completely different movie with 2 and 3.
Probably,
yeah. That movie would be way up there in the ranking. But yeah, I think we beat that to death. We can talk about Empire a lot, but so we'll get to my number 2 was Force Awakens.
Okay.
So this was tough. It was really tough. So obviously, if my number 2 is Force Awakens, we know what my number 1 is.
Sure.
So Force Awakens to me, and we've had this discussion on your other podcast. Force Awakens for me there was so much build up to it, and it for me personally, we talked earlier about how maybe it didn't have so much to fall because of the prequels, like people's expectations weren't that high.
Sure,
mine were absolutely that high because I felt like this is instead of what the prequels had going for it was in the beginning. There was nothing to compare it to. Like it was building up to what we already knew.
Right.
This was taking it from where we already knew and taking it forward.
Right, and that was a big part of the prequels too, was the fact that their hands were kind of tied as far as storytelling goes.
Yeah, they could only introduce so many characters because it had to get it had to get to the future.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So Force Awakens for me when it having said that and knowing that this is going to take these characters and how is this going to progress? Like we know there's a trilogy coming. Like how are they going to do this? How is Disney going to handle this? How is all these things going to happen? And oh, by the way, I'd read piles and piles of expanded universe stuff. Like I think that's where a lot of us that's why Force Awakens either people really enjoyed it or maybe it doesn't make people's top 3. In their movies.
Oh yeah, no, trust me, I know people who didn't like it at all.
Because if you're into the expanding universe at all, you had an expectation of these stories were so good. And I'll be the first to tell you, where they took the Luke character, and the Solo children and all that stuff, and the way they developed those characters, pounds and pounds and piles of books that I read because I was so completely into it. For me, there was such an expectation of okay, they're not going to do this, then what are they going to do? And I still thoroughly enjoy it. I watched it night before last. I threw it on right before bed, and watched it just to catch some more of the nuances. I think that being this age, at this point too, we haven't talked at all about the John Williams score. And if you listen to any of the podcasts I've on with you, and I gush over John Williams all the time anyway, but going into this and hearing that you alluded to it with TFA, the score, like the iconic John Williams score and how well he scored this movie. For me, Rogue One took a hit because of I didn't like the score. I think it took I just don't like where it went with the score, and you can listen to the Rogue One podcast about that. But this TFA had so many things going for it. There's some characters that I don't necessarily like. Doesn't matter. Right. It really doesn't matter, because I will put on that movie, and if you had to choose, like, okay, do you want to watch Return of the Jedi tonight, or do you want to watch Force Awakens? Now that's subjective, because it might depend on what mood I'm in.
Right. Sure.
But because of the way I love all the movies. But if I had to choose, more often than not, I'm going to choose Force Awakens, because it's still pretty new, right? I mean, it just came out 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's still nuances of this movie that maybe I'm not picking up.
Right. And again, we haven't seen the two movies following this either. So we don't know where they're taking this story from here. So, and that could drastically affect how we see The Force Awakens down the road.
Right.
So,
all right. So what's your number 2?
Number 2, Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
And I'm going to preface this by saying, for years and years and years, this was actually what I would call my favorite Star Wars movie.
Okay.
Because, like we talked about before, 1983, almost 7-year-old Jason going to the theater for the first time to see this, completely awestruck, right? Absolutely loved it. Loved it for years and years afterwards, after getting it on VHS. It had that epic feel that the original movie had for me. The epic scale, the locations. It was a great ending to that trilogy. I could go into a ton of details. In fact, didn't we? Yeah, we reviewed Return of the Jedi on Project VCR too.
Yes, so we did.
You can go listen to Project VCR for that review. But
you should link to it in the show notes.
I know. Yeah, I should just link all these episodes that we did. But I'm also an Ewok apologist. I had the Ewok Village playset. As a kid, I had all the little Ewoks. I loved the Ewok Adventure movie, which we've talked about that a little bit offline, which that's something that we're going to have to explore a little bit. But I mean, honestly, it was just very little about this movie I didn't like. Just every aspect of it. And again, for years and years, I said it was my favorite Star Wars movie, and it's still pretty damn close to the top. Obviously, it's my number 2.
Obviously.
So, but yeah, we can get into that at another time. And moving on, I guess it's pretty obvious what both of our number 1s are, and it is Episode 4, A New Hope, the original movie.
The original movie.
And here's the thing about this, because again, another movie we reviewed on Project VCR. You see why we started a Star Wars only podcast, because all of Project VCR was just becoming Project Star Wars. So,
just a way for me to get more guest time.
Yeah. When we reviewed it, which we only just reviewed it right before Rogue One came out last December.
Right.
I busted out my VHSs on my TV right in here, and I watched the original non-special edition widescreen version on an old VCR, and I was still just in awe. Just everything they were able to pull off in this movie was just done so well, from the effects that still hold up today for the most part, to the characters in some of the dialogue. It's definitely got some of that Lucas touch to it, but it's not nearly prequel bad.
No.
But it's just everything about this movie. It's just so fantastic. It's so engrossing. It really makes you feel like you're there in these environments with these characters. And just, I mean, what else can you say? Just, it's the reason why we're sitting here, you know, and it's the catalyst for all this. Like, we wouldn't be sitting here recording a podcast together right now if it wasn't for Star Wars, you know? So it's you think about it in that aspect, and just how it changed the fucking world.
My notes, all I wrote down was the perfect movie.
Yeah.
And I will be buried with a copy of this film.
Oh, have you decided that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll probably burn with it. I think I'm going to do one of those Jedi style burnings.
Yeah. I was thinking cremation too.
Yeah. But they throw stuff in there with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that being said, it's all those things you said. Think of how different our lives would be without this movie. And there's a lot of people out there that are listening to this, and hopefully people in the future are listening to this. Like, really think about that. like the movies you enjoy, like the things you enjoy, the puns that you make, you know, the references, you know, who doesn't know who Darth Vader is?
Right.
Who doesn't when you think of evil and equate it with Darth Vader, you know, or the Empire or Imperials and, you know, things like that. And what's funny is, like, I really look for excuses to not have this be my number one movie. That's how I kind of went about it. It's like,
oh, really?
I know what my number one is. Let me find reasons as to not. Because there's part of me that, like, Lucas decided that he was going to do, like, all right, he's going to look at, like, World War II footage and, you know, kind of, like, you look at the, you know, when they're in the weapons pods in the Millennium Falcon, you know, like shooting at the TIE fighters, stuff like that, you know, that's all, like, Lucas watched vintage, you know, ball turret footage from World War II to have some of those things line up in the shooting scenes.
Yeah.
Take physics out of it. Because I talked about it in the other podcast, you know, like, you know, like what it is, they're sitting down, they're staring at the bottom, even though it's kind of up or whatever. It's just some goofy shit there, but
that's all part of the suspending your disbelief.
Exactly. And every single time I watch this movie, I can do that.
Yeah.
Every time. And it's, you sit there and go, it has a beginning, it has an end. Like, this movie is perfect in and of itself. It has, you know, romanticized notions about good and evil, which is fine. It fits in the context of what they're trying to do.
Sure.
You know, it adds an element of fantasy to something that's actually very visceral. You know, when you're talking, you know, you're on these desert planets, like, and you don't think about the desert planet. You don't think about what's going on. Like, it's like, these are where these characters are. There's no reason for them not to be. Like, I can't find reasons why, like, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't fit. You know, the starships. You know, the size of things, like, okay, obviously Empire's the bully here. And they have giant starships, and the rebels are flying things that are, you know, like the X-Wings that are just fast enough to be dangerous because there's not as many of them, or the Empire's throwing thousands of TIE fighters out there with maybe less skilled pilots. And
sure, yeah. All
these places you can go with this. But yeah, it really comes down to it is the impact that this movie's had on my life. Even if it came out when I was 2 years old. You know, dump a bunch of Star Wars toys in front of me, you know, as a kid, you know, and play with these toys. And, you know, I had a thing with tanks and G.I. Joe, you know, G.I. Joes and stuff were out there.
Oh, sure.
All these characters intertwined, you know, they all pile into the back of the Millennium Falcon, you know, and, you know, you'd fly around and do this stuff. It's just, without belaboring it anymore, it's just the perfect movie. And like you said, you know, pretty eloquently, it is the reason we're doing this. It's the reason we're here. Because it's, you know, there's so many people, so many millions and millions of us out there that are so just, you know, this is a part of our lifestyles.
Right.
Is this movie.
And it would be one thing if it was just maybe a few thousand nerdy guys all like, oh, we love Star Wars. But no, it's millions and millions and millions of people who all feel the same way.
And not to, you know, you know, bring Star Trek into this, right? Let's talk, you know, if you talk about, like, there's a level of fandom there with Star Trek. With Star Trek's a little bit more ethereal.
Sure.
But those people, like, Star Trek didn't have the epic nature that, to me, Star Wars did. Like,
right.
Like, when you got involved in this world, like, Star Trek was probably a little bit too close to being real.
Right, because, you know, again, I mean?
it had a
just,
sci-fi element.
Yeah, but it's just the future of planet Earth.
Right.
And,
it's
and
still guns.
species.
It's still gun battles and everything else. There's no lightsabers. There's no force.
Right.
You know, Star Wars does and introduces all this into our world, and it's made a part of our vernacular. Like I said, I'm not a Star Trek, like, I'm not a big episode watcher, but I really enjoyed the movies.
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate
it. And I like the movies, but it's not Star Wars.
No.
You know, Star Wars makes me tingle when I hear the music.
Yeah.
You know, I'll sit in a car and listen to 15 minutes of John Williams, you know, Star Wars soundtrack, just on a shuffle, just randomly. And I'll put myself, every time I hear that, I put myself into the movie. You know, no other movie has ever done that or probably going to do that for me.
Yeah, just 2 or 3 hours ago as I was typing up all these notes and stuff, I had Ray's theme going on YouTube as I'm like doing all my notes and stuff because again, it's
like I said, I was listening to the first intro into Force Awakens and had that epiphany about, you know, something we'll leave for another discussion point later in the episode. But it is the movie. Yep. It is the movie to beat all movies.
And throughout the course of the show, we'll get into the finer details of all these movies, I'm sure. So don't fret that we didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about individual movies, because this podcast
will be 4 hours long if you let me talk.
Oh God, I'm sure we can make it longer than that.
Yeah, we'd just be pausing for pee breaks.
Yeah, but the one thing I do want to say is, for the listeners out there, what are your lists? Do you agree with our lists? Do you have your own that are drastically different? Hit us up on social media. We'll throw all this stuff in at the end. But anything else on the movie ordering before we move on?
Yeah,
All right, so then, we'll go ahead and throw out the social media stuff. So do you want to spout off everything that we have out there?
Yeah, so we're trying to make our presence felt out there on the social medias.
Yep.
We're on Instagram primarily as All Things Star Wars Pod. So at All Things Star Wars Pod on Instagram. We got some stuff posted. Obviously we're trying to get this big lead up. We're going to drop this May the 4th.
Yes.
Kind of, I don't think there's any one of us that aren't going to be wearing some Star Wars related gear.
Oh, sure.
On the 4th. So I figure it's perfect time to drop something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And like Jason said, throw some on Instagram. We're looking at it constantly. I like it as a medium because, it's a good interaction and it's more than 140 characters.
Yeah,
but we are also on Twitter, and I should have wrote it down, but I did it. So I'm going to scroll.
All right.
And it's All Things SW Pod on Twitter.
Okay.
And what I did was I'm linking, when we put something on Instagram, I'm just going to link it to Twitter, so it posts at the same time.
Okay.
So anything you see on Twitter, like it'll link you back into Instagram. It's just for ease of communicating back and forth with people. I think Instagram's just the better one.
Sure. We don't really have anything on Facebook right now, but
Not yet.
Stay tuned. We may end up either, if not just creating a page that you can like and follow, we may even end up doing a Facebook group. So we'll see how that goes. For personal social media, I'm Darth Roscom on Twitter, so you can follow me there. If you, for some reason, need to email me, I'm jcroscom@gmail.com. Oh, we also have a Gmail, too.
We do. Yeah, All Things Star Wars Pod @gmail.com.
Yes, and all of this stuff will be in the show description. So if you have something lengthy you want to send to us, email it, because
Jason makes up these show notes and it's like, hey, we're going to talk about all the social media stuff. And we do all this talking. I'm like, I'm supposed to remember off the top of my head.
Yeah,
no, we'll write that down next time.
Yeah, Dave needs to prepare better. All right, so what about your personal social media?
I'm big on Instagram at PhillyDave75. If you want to listen to me rant about Philly sports teams, because I was born in Philly. We live in New Jersey. Yep. So we're right in the shadow of Philly where we're at. So hear me rant about that stuff. I take lots of pictures too of photography is kind of my when I'm not watching Star Wars as part of my meditation. I'll go out and take pictures of the moon a lot.
You have a non-Star Wars hobby? I don't buy it.
Everything relates back to Star Wars at one point. Yeah. Sometimes in order to stay fresh with Star Wars, you need to take a picture of the moon that looks like the Death Star.
Right.
And then everything comes back to Star Wars. But yeah, at PhillyDave75, pretty much on IG, on Twitter, and actually I think my Facebook page is at PhillyDave75 too. I cornered the market.
Yes. Be sure to give them a lot of shit every time the Eagles and the Phillies lose a game.
When the Phillies lose a game, we're rebuilding, and I'll stand toe to toe with anybody who wants to argue with me about the Eagles. Go Birds.
So how do you feel
about
this first episode?
That's fucking great, man. We just talked for an hour and 23 minutes about Star Wars.
Yeah.
And we could have talked for way longer. This is it. This is what we want to do. As soon as we start talking about this stuff, it's the best.
Now, Dave said an hour and 23 minutes. You, the listeners, may be seeing it as more like an hour and 10, because I'm going to have to cut out every time Dave says, and that's going to be a lot in this episode. I've been keeping tally. It's
probably at least 15 minutes, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Feel free to. Hey, listen, we all have our issues. That's one of them.
Yep.
If I have to listen to my own nasally voice, then, might as well say a bunch of times.
Yep. And this episode, as Dave said, should be dropping on May the 4th. And every week after. So next week's topics, I believe we're going to be talking more about movie orders, now about viewing order.
Right.
We're going to go a little into the machete order. So if you want to do some research before that episode hits, just Google the Star Wars machete order and research that. And we're going to talk about it a little bit next episode. And we're also going to do lists of our top 5 favorite characters in the Star Wars universe.
Yes, to include expanded universe stuff too.
Yes, old and new.
This is not Jason prefaced it earlier, and I'll we have a lot of expanded universe knowledge, between the two of us, especially with the book series and all kinds of comics books and stuff like that. So, we may not be going to deep water, Star Wars nerding quite off the bat, but definitely anticipate some episodes where we're going to be getting into some stuff like that, because there's a lot of really, really good, really entertaining stuff out there.
Yep.
It's definitely worth your while.
Yep. And yeah, I definitely want to keep the spirit of that old expanded universe alive, because like Dave said, there was just such good stuff in there, and so much of it.
Oh, yeah.
A lifetime's worth of reading between the books, comics, everything else. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close this up.
Yeah,
so
if we had more beer, we could cheers to the end of a successful one. Hopefully it actually recorded.
Yeah. May the force be with you.
May the force be with you.